This is your urgent call to action. We are all called to lead in a world in chaos, crisis, and turmoil. Join a pivotal global movement for change to transform the leadership crisis worldwide. Will you play it safe, or will you wake up, step up, and speak out? Like Nelson Mandela did for South Africa and the world, we need a radical new way to think, act, and lead, leading boldly into the future. Join host Ann Pratt, a Harvard Fellow and multi-awarded businesswoman, and unlock the best version of yourself to revolutionize leadership with what the world needs now.
Greetings to all you future bold leaders. Thank you for joining us from around the world. My name is Ann Pratt. I'm formerly from South Africa, and I relocated abroad to attend a Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative Fellowship in beautiful Boston in the United States of America. Today, our thoughtful bold leader is a woman who was born and raised in Costa Rica, a beautiful country in Central America, best known for its magnificent beaches, volcanoes, protected jungles, and biodiversity. She is an academic, a Harvard Fellow, and a diplomat. Currently, she is Professor of Practice at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Baltimore, Maryland, in the USA. Previously, she was Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs and UN Ambassador for Costa Rica. She has an impressive track record in negotiations and international relations at national level, at continental regional level, and internationally. She, as president of the United Nations Conference, led the international negotiations for the United Nations Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, signed by up to 197 states and adopted in 2021. Stay tuned as she shares more with us about how her childhood memories and listening to media reports on the Panama Canal, yes, the Panama Canal, and South Africa set the stage for her diplomatic career. Her now or never moment as a young adult, which gave her the fortitude and boldness and led to her first appearance at the United Nations, where she met Nelson Mandela, and the complexity and interconnectivity of international negotiations and relations. We warmly welcome my inspiring friend, Elayne Whyte Gómez, and welcome to Leading Boldly into the Future. Elayne, my friend, it's always such a joy to see you. Thank you so much for bringing your powerful voice and your wisdom to the table and being part of this global Mandela leadership movement. It's wonderful to see you.
It's wonderful to see you, Anne, and thank you very much for this opportunity. I have a personal relationship with Mandela and his leadership path. So I am very, very happy to be joining in this conversation with you.
That's wonderful. Well, I know you've had an incredible career, but I know that your passion for this calling started quite young in life, and your journey, from Costa Rica to the United Nations, and of course you were also Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs in your country. So traveling into the international world, international relations and negotiations has been a big part of your life, Elayne. But I know that it starts with a backstory when you were young. And I would love to know, in that young life, what shaped you in terms of this calling in the world?
Well, actually, it is true. My interest in the world, in public life and international relations started as a young girl.
Yes.
I used to get up in the morning before getting ready to go to school. I would spend some time with my dad.
Yeah.
So at the time, dads used to read the newspaper right before going to work.
Yeah.
And he would also listen to the radio news while he was reading the newspaper.
Yeah.
So I would spend time with him while he was doing that, and I was able to ask him questions about things that I saw he was reading about, or things that I heard.
Yes.
There are some special moments and special events that I think had a very profound impact in me.
Yeah.
I grew up then, I was able to track down those moments and relate those memories of those specific moments with I had learned about exactly what had happened. So I remember this time between, I think it was 75 and 76, 1975, 1976.
Yeah.
My dad paid special attention to certain news, and that there was our top processes that were going on for months and years, and he always was paying attention to them.
Yeah.
One of them was the transition to democracy in Spain, and when the dictator passed away in 75. The other one was the negotiations of the treaty for the Panama Canal, to return the Panama Canal to Panama.
Yeah.
I think it was between 76 and 77. And also I remembered something that my father paid a lot of attention to.
Yeah.
It was news coming from South Africa.
Yeah.
And I recall the name of this place, Soweto.
Soweto. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I understood then what was happening.
Yes.
I think he must have had a challenge to explain to me what was happening in such a way that I could have a view, but at the same time, that he would not create sadness in my heart as a young girl.
Yes. Yes. And sorry, 1976 were the Soweto uprisings where children rioted and protested against having to go to school and study in Afrikaans, which was a foreign language to them and also not extensively spoken internationally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But so when I grew up and I went back
Yes.
to look at, to study some history, and when I became aware of many processes at the world stage, I was able to relate what I was learning with those moments with my dad. But also I remember that New York and Geneva were cities associated with important things that were happening related to the United Nations.
Yes.
And the way in which the United Nations was actually dealing with apartheid and with the colonization process. So I understood that some important things were happening there related to these aspects that I was listening to, and especially that my dad was paying a lot of attention to.
That's interesting. How old were you? How did you feel at the time?
I was still in primary school, so must have been around 10, 9, between 9 and 11, I would say.
Yeah. And how did you feel at the time, and what did your dad do that he was professionally? What do you?
My dad?
Yeah.
Oh, no, he was in accounting.
And accounting. Okay.
But he didn't want us to be an accountants. He expressly told me that he did not want me to follow the same professional journey, that he wanted me to do, to explore other paths. But in reality, I didn't know at the time. But what he was doing was actually him and my mom as well. They were planting a seed in me, right? They were creating this interest, or they were opening my eyes to the world and to the social processes and change and problems and challenges of humanity.
And how did you feel at the time when you were listening to that radio, Elayne, listening to these different stories, whether it be about the Panama Canal or Spain or South Africa? How did you feel?
I think I felt like hunger about learning about everything. It felt like I wanted to know as much as possible so that I could understand what was going on. But at the time, I think I had not gained this sense of agency or empowerment that you can actually promote change. That came later on in life.
Yeah.
I think at the time I became really just very passionate about the reality of society, and to be mindful of how we are shaped by events that happen outside of our home.
Yes.
And
In
so
a
my
bigger
heart,
geopolitical world.
absolutely,
Yes,
yes.
yes. So you shared with me previously, and I'd love you to share this, just your journey from Costa Rica to the United Nations. And I know that was quite a pivotal moment in time, a very brave and bold moment in time. Can you take us back to the year? Tell us a little bit about what happened and what was the catalyst? What catapulted you from your country to the United Nations?
So let me see. Well, first of all, before going there, I need to mention at what point I decided to study this career or to
Yes,
study international relations, because I also wanted to study law. I
yes,
wanted to go for a law degree. I had a hard time trying to make up my mind, but at some point, my heart leaned into international relations, and that's when I discovered that I had this passion to learn about the world in reality. It is very interesting because then I continued my education and got a master's degree in things that were very different from global politics. I was more interested in trade and regional integration, and I worked for the first years of my professional life. I was more devoted to my region,
yes,
to Central America, and to understanding the peace processes in Central America. Those were extraordinary events that I was seeing transformation in my own immediate region, from civil wars to peace processes. So I was very, very impacted by that. And I was appointed as Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs. And at some point when, before I went into diplomacy,
yes,
before I even took the Foreign Service examinations, I had the opportunity to work at the legislature in Costa Rica.
yes.
And that was transformative for me. And I'm going to tell you why.
Well, perhaps if you can identify a particular moment.
Yes.
So a moment in time, what was the event? How did you feel at the time? And how did that transform how you changed your mind about your career?
Well, actually, I was lucky enough to work for a congressperson that was a very progressive man, a very humanistic person.
Yes,
And so we talked at the very, very early in the journey about the need to have a piece of legislation against sexual harassment in the workplace and academia. And that was pioneer in
yes,
our region and mostly in the world.
yes,
And he was very enthusiastic about it.
yeah.
And so here I was at a very young stage in my career. Sorry?
How old were you at the time?
I would say 29 to 30.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
And he said, we're going to go ahead with that process. It was transformative. It was very difficult in a Latin American society of 30 years ago.
Yes,
Very difficult to talk about sexual harassment, but something that was before that was considered a normal social practice. So what happened was that we were able to achieve that piece of legislation in a matter of 7 months. And
how
it
did you do it,
became,
Elayne? Can you take us through the steps of what you did? Just briefly.
so first of all, he created an alliance across the aisle. We were in a bipartisan political system in Costa Rica, two strong political parties.
Yeah,
So he created an alliance with a congressman from another man from the other political party. And the first thing that we did was to run a comparative analysis of how different countries in the world addressed the issue of sexual harassment. And that's when we realized that we were being pioneers, that only very, very few nations actually had a specific legislation about that. So that was the first aspect. Then we built a team of experts from the judiciary, also women leaders, people who have been engaged for decades working on women's rights. But also, as I said, we worked with judges, we worked with other legal experts,
yeah.
and we were able to identify the middle ground that we needed to have
Interesting.
for this concept to go through and to be accepted
Yeah,
in a in American society 30 years ago.
Yes.
It gave me why it was so transformative, because I had a dream to work on that, because many women around the world, young women were exposed to that behavior throughout our lives. And
Yeah.
I thought that it was very important for the future generations not to go through that, through those processes and through those experiences.
Yeah.
And for society to be able to put a name to that behavior.
Yeah. So you got it through. You found that middle ground.
We found the middle ground, but what that experience gave me
Yes.
was that at a very early stage in my career,
Yeah.
one, I had a dream.
Yes.
Two, I had the wonderful opportunity to work towards that dream.
Yes.
I learned from my boss, the congressman, and the two congressmen that were leading these men also. They were leading this political process that was very difficult. I saw them building bridges, setting up strategies, trying to keep the opposition in its place, and trying to build agreements so that they would let us move through the process and not block the piece of legislation. So I learned about strategy.
Yeah.
Big time. But I think above all, it gave me a sense that when you are in public life, you are able to move the needle. And so I just I just acquired that aspiration that if you're in public life, just try to look for a little window of opportunity to move the needle.
Yes, and that great experience and excitement of moving the needle for women in Costa Rica.
It was so fulfilling.
Yes.
And as I said, so transformative, and it so much shaped my own perception of what I could do while I was moving on in my career.
I'd love you to share the story of how you got appointed as an ambassador, because I know that that was quite a spunky, bold moment in your life. Take us back there before we get to the UN.
Well, this is indeed quite interesting, because at some point in my life, maybe when I was in my 30s, I was thinking about what I wanted to aspire to later on in my life.
Yes.
And at some point I thought, well, it would be very interesting to be an ambassador at the UN. That's what I would like to be at maybe when I am close to 50 years old. That would be a very good thing to do at that time in my life. And I have to say that I completely forgot about it. I was doing all other work. I didn't remember about that precisely, because for that, many things have to come together, especially political opportunities.
Yeah.
But there was a time in which this person that was elected as president was a colleague of mine that I had shared many moments with, and we had...
President of the country?
Yes.
Okay. Well, who was at the time? Who was that?
So it was Luis Guillermo Solís, President Solís. We had been colleagues working with issues of Central American integration and Central American problems.
Yeah.
And we worked together several years, and were, attending many different meetings in which I shared my views and my aspirations and everything. Not that I said that I wanted to be an ambassador to the UN, because that was something that was very private. That was a very, private aspiration.
Yeah.
So at some point I received a phone call, and they asked me what I thought about taking on board this position to represent Costa Rica as an ambassador to the United Nations.
Yes.
And of course, that immediately touched my heart.
I know you've had a remarkable Mandela moment in your life, and you were invited as part of a delegation to go to the General Assembly in 1998. Can you take us back to that moment, Elayne? I know that was a very big moment in your life. Share with us how you felt, how you got there, and what that moment meant to you.
Well, first of all, I would like to mention that precisely because of this passion that I had,
yeah,
I actually requested whether I could join the Costa Rican delegation. I requested to be considered to join the Costa Rican delegation. I was just starting in my career, so it was not like an obvious thing that somebody who's joining the Foreign Service recently was going to join. So I requested, and I think that I conveyed that request with such level of, it was such bright in my eyes and such aspiration and excitement about this dream, that I think that nobody could resist my enthusiasm. So I was on board. I was on board as a note taker for meetings, for many meetings. There were, I don't know, 1 or 2 weeks of meetings.
Who did you ask?
The minister.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Of Foreign Affairs. Yes.
Okay. And he said,
so it was one of these moments in which you say to yourself, it's now, it is now or never.
No,
or forever hold your peace. So I just decided to speak out and say, Minister, since I was a kid, I have been dreaming about going to the United Nations. I would be, I don't know what I promised that I was going to be so, so realized, so fulfilled.
Yes.
To see this come true, that I guess I conveyed it with such energy and passion.
And you said yes, and you arrived in New York, for the 50th.
I arrived in New York, and I was there for, for the several first meetings. Every half an hour or every 15 minutes, there is a meeting. And I was taking, and all of a sudden, I discover this day that the first speaker of the morning, I think, or I don't know which speaker it was in the morning, it was Nelson Mandela.
Yes.
And I had to be in different meetings at the time, and I requested permission, special permission.
Yes.
To attend Mandela's speech.
Yes.
And you know what I asked? What I said, actually my dad had passed away at the time. And I asked my boss and the minister, on behalf of my dad and all my ancestors, please allow me to go see this. This is a special moment in my life.
Yes. Yes.
So I guess again, I asked this with such conviction.
Yes.
Passion and humanity that nobody could have said no.
And that was because going back to that early childhood when your father used to play the radio, let you read the newspapers and share with you around what was going on in an apartheid South Africa.
Immediately when I realized he was there to speak, I just immediately touched my personal history.
Yes.
Those moments with my dad, those moments in which I heard so many days, the word Soweto, the name Soweto, and the United Nations, and doing things. I don't know if I ever told you that the first passport I got as a child, the passport said, I don't know, maybe I didn't tell you this, the passport said, this passport is valid to travel to any country in the world except for South Africa.
Wow.
Because Costa Rica had been following the United Nations and, recommendations to cut ties with the apartheid regime. So there were many parts of my personal history that were present at that moment when I discovered that. So when I was sitting there at that seat at the Assembly Hall of the General Assembly, it was Elayne Whyte, the young diplomat. It was the little girl. Little girl whose parents had actually, opened my eyes in such a manner that I would feel connected to many things that were happening around the world. And this was absolutely significant for me. And I did not know at the moment that it was his last speech. That was his farewell speech.
Yes.
For the UN before he finished his
presidency.
Yes, exactly.
Special, Elayne. So you have to share with us. How did you feel on the day? What did you see? Take us back. Paint a picture of that moment.
Well, the first thing I have to say is that he passed the baton, and he closed his speech by saying that he was going to retire in Kunu.
Yes.
In Kunu,
where he was born and raised.
When he was born and raised. And that, but he entertained the hope that there had emerged a cadre of leaders in Africa and in the world that would not allow that any would go through the same things that they went through as Black South Africans.
Yeah.
That any, and I remember the last word, I have the aspiration that this new cadre of leaders would not allow that any would be stripped of our dignity, of the dignity as we were.
Yes.
Can you imagine what that felt for me as a call? As it was a calling for me.
Yes.
To engage in improving the conditions of life of many people around the world, but also to raise the voice and to seek for justice and human rights protections for many people in the world. You are shaped, I was shaped in seeing diplomacy and international relations as a practice and as a space where you can actually move the needle to improve the lives of many people.
Yes, and it was also the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights. Yeah, yeah. So a very special moment. And yes. So how did you feel?
At that moment?
Yeah.
So I felt that I was the most fortunate person in the world.
You were excited?
I was absolutely excited.
Yes.
I was close to him. I was not able to shake his hand.
Yeah.
But I was close to him. And in reality, I think I communicated with my dad and my ancestors at the moment. And I was able to connect with that aspiration for justice.
Yes. Yes.
That was conveyed to me by my dad and you know, my ancestors overall.
That's wonderful, Elayne. And that's a great segue into how do you define leadership?
I think I would say that leadership is a space that provides us with opportunity to improve our lives, to improve the lives, or to solve problems.
Yeah.
And I think to also to seek that we become in touch with the highest version of ourselves.
Absolutely.
So the exercise of leadership is an exercise of projecting your own values and your own aspirations.
Yeah.
Of listening to the values and aspirations of other people.
Yeah.
And to try to find that space where you connect the resources, connect the energy, and connect the beliefs.
Yeah.
To move together towards something.
Yeah. And
I think that move together towards something.
Yeah.
It always has to be with the aspiration of respecting who we are as human beings.
Yes.
And improving how we live as human beings.
How we live as human beings. And when I listen to you, what you're also sharing is that your definition of leadership, and there are so many, is that it begins with self. It begins with an understanding of self, but also finding and developing that best version of ourselves.
Well, I think you know, when I train diplomats about negotiations,
you
know how all the theories and all the academic literature and theories about negotiations actually teach you how to prepare the process, and you engage with other people.
Yes.
How you deal with difficult situations, how you strategize. But when I train diplomats about negotiations, I tell them that I think the very first step in preparing for a negotiation is to check in with yourself.
Yeah.
It is to check in with yourself while looking at yourself at the mirror in the morning.
Yeah.
And try to understand where you are.
Yeah.
In relationship, I mean, where you are as a person, what you believe about the process that you are engaged in as a negotiator.
Yes.
What you believe about the topic, about the other players, about the process, because imagine if you are negotiating something you don't believe in.
Yeah, yeah.
Imagine you are going to negotiate a topic that you feel very strongly about, you think is very important, that touches upon your values and your aspirations.
Yes.
Then you're going to be a completely different person at the room,
Yes.
at the table.
Yes.
You are going to engage in a different manner. Your face is going to look different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So self-preparation. Yeah.
Checking with yourself and with your values and where you are, what your strengths are, and what your weaknesses are, your blind spots. I think it is not only for in preparing for negotiations, but especially to become a leader or to be leading processes.
Yeah.
All of us human beings, there is no perfect model human being, right?
We're all
We are distinct.
Yeah.
We are shaped by our history. We are shaped by our context. We have our strengths. We have our beautiful spots and not so bright spots, and the beautiful parts of our history, or the sad parts of our history. So, but in reality, a leadership has to be a person that is self-confident.
Yeah.
Not a person that is going to project fears.
Yeah.
And mistrust. Is a person that is going to project that acceptance of who you are as a normal human being.
Yeah.
You knowing there is no perfect model, right, for a human being.
So, you know, in the world, we have a lot of big challenges. And what struck me about then President Mandela's address to the General Assembly in 1998 is when he referenced quite a lot of the big challenges in the world. Quite a lot of them still exist in the world today. So what are perhaps the top three, just very briefly, what are the top three challenges for you, Elayne? I mean, obviously you're working in this world of global negotiations. The world has changed. You know, globalization is a reality. What are the big issues for you in this big global community today?
I think we need to separate the challenges that are related to our existence as humanity.
Yeah.
Those other problems that can be solved without compromising the future generations and the existence of humanity as a whole. So here is my view. For centuries, we have been taught as diplomats that we need to negotiate to achieve the national interests, the interests of the state that we represent,
Yeah.
but also to somewhat preserve the international system.
Yes.
Well, I think we need to add another level.
Yeah.
Which is that we need to certainly achieve the interest of the state that we represent. We certainly have to preserve the international system, but above all, we have to preserve our species and the ecosystem that we're part of. So we have a responsibility towards the concept of humanity as a whole.
Yes.
Towards the ecosystem that we are part of, which is planet Earth.
Yes.
So we have to consider not only these social constructions between the state and international system are social constructions, right?
Sure.
But those social constructions are also shaped by the planet and by storms and hurricanes and earthquakes and the possibility of a comet coming and crashing against the Earth and the possibility to have biodiversity so that future generations are going to be able to thrive as well. So we don't only have a short-term responsibility to deal with the short term, but also with the long term.
Yes.
That means that the most important challenges I see are the challenges of what we would say people and planet.
Yeah.
As material realities that we need to preserve and to use all the human traits, creativity, leadership, adaptability, everything that we have as a species to build processes and build institutions and build negotiations that basically would make us live a better life on Earth.
So if I can sum that up, I mean, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're talking about the challenge of preserving planet Earth as an ecosystem for humanity. And if I'm also hearing you correctly, it's also about the future of humanity as a species.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And to what extent, how do you balance, when you teach these classes, Elayne, around global negotiations and negotiations for humanity, how do you balance these big existential threats and challenges with people's national needs? What do you teach people around? And do you have a specific example you could share with us and then take us through that example and, what would be the steps and processes that your students or people could follow?
So I think I emphasize a lot to work on the concept of complexity.
Yes.
Because all these problems that I mentioned are complex in nature.
Yes.
And I emphasize the fact that what complexity means in reality is that it's a reality that is composed of different but interconnected components.
Yeah.
So I emphasize that we should try to overcome, not abandon, but to overcome and to complement this silo thinking in which we're thinking about a problem as if it were only one single reality, and try to understand how this problem interconnects with many other problems. And
Do you have a practical example?
Yes.
Yeah.
You know that actually there are negotiations going on to deal with the problem of plastic pollution in the world. That at the end, I mean, plastic pollution ends up being ocean pollution because all plastic ends up in the ocean.
Yeah.
So these negotiations, so if you negotiate only with the concept of the nation state, you probably are going to be focused on negotiating, like you negotiate on issues of climate change, what national measures you need to undertake so that your country uses less plastic.
Yeah.
So you can actually sit with other countries, everybody says how much plastic consumption they are going to reduce. And that is good because that is a part of the solution.
Yeah.
But what happens when that plastic has already reached the ocean in areas that are beyond national jurisdictions?
Sure.
Who is going to clean up that garbage?
Yeah.
We already have seen all these islands of plastic and that actually swim around the oceans. We needed an international effort and a new mentality to see how we collaborate to go out and clean
Yeah.
those islands of contamination that are already out there. So we cannot only think about what we do in our home, but we need to see how we collaborate to solve the problem once the problem has reached
Yes.
our common spaces and
Yes.
is contaminating our common spaces.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that is part of the negotiations going on.
And is there a particular framework that you use for that?
So I combine, because here is I think the most important challenge. Human knowledge is cumulative.
Yeah.
Right? And I think our challenge is not to throw away the water with the baby.
Yeah.
In the top.
Yeah.
We need to see what, from all the knowledge that we have accumulated, what serves us well for this moment and what we need to change and adapt.
Yeah.
So it is true that we're not to completely say, so don't negotiate on the basis of national interest, because that doesn't exist. All nations, all diplomats at the table are going to be representing a government.
Yeah.
We emphasize this work of seeking to complement how my nation is affected by this global problem and how my national interest is related to a global problem.
Yes.
How I contribute to the problem or how I am specifically affected by that problem. And that creates a different, let's say, like an interface
Yes.
between the view of my nation and the global problem. And this is where we try to find collaborative solutions and to try to create interest, to identify the interest beyond nations, interest of regions, interest of continents, interest of, the small island development states or indigenous peoples, some other realities that exist out there that are not necessarily bound by the national boundaries and jurisdictions.
Yeah. And how do you find your students respond to that thinking?
So I think they are both intrigued and inspired by these new challenges because being citizens of the world of the 21st century, in reality, they have a very good sense of being citizens of the world, of being part of humanity.
Yes.
And they have a better sense of the world as an interconnected reality, of the interconnected reality that we are today, that nothing that happens today is going to, in a country actually stays there. Usually it is interconnected with other aspects.
So from a leadership point of view, what do you think are the critical ingredients, competencies that are required of leadership today when negotiating for humanity on this global stage?
So I think, again, I emphasize over and over again to work with complexity.
Yeah.
As I said, complexity means interconnection of problems and components of the problems. So the first aspect I think that we need is to try to overcome this silo and binary mentality.
Yeah.
Because today it is not choosing between you or me.
Yeah.
Between environment and growth, environment or growth.
It's and.
Security or human rights. It is you and me.
Yeah.
It is economic growth and environmental sustainability.
Yeah.
It is security with respect to human rights. It is innovation with respect to human rights. So saying it is easier than actually creating this mentality, because it is, I used to discuss this with one of our faculty at Harvard, Professor Habat, with whom we worked on systems thinking and problems of humanity.
Yes.
And so we used to call this reductionist thinking. And sometimes it is important because in order to really understand one problem, we need to detach it and to decompose it into its parts so that we can very well understand it.
Yes.
But then we have to put it back together.
Yes.
So I think in leadership, that is fundamental. That I get the impression that many people of the young generation, they are more able to have this holistic mentality of building interconnections.
Yes. Yeah.
Building interconnections and not making decisions about you or me, but decisions based on what we need to do so that the decision is going to include you and me.
Shifting gear a little, just some fun facts about Elayne Whyte, the human being. What is it that you most passionately love about your country of your birth, Costa Rica?
Ooh. Oh, that's difficult to say one thing or the other, but I'm going to start with nature.
Yes.
And both green and sunshine at the beach.
Yeah.
All the green, the mountains, the vegetation, all the ecosystem is wonderful. It's full of energy.
Yeah.
And also we always joke about this thought that you don't need therapy, you don't need a doctor. The only thing you need is to go to the beach in Costa Rica.
Oh, really?
Yes. For me, going to the beach is is life.
Is life. That's so interesting. That's wonderful. I can't wait to get to them, Elayne, when we get
Hopefully
together.
we will do it.
Yes, we will. You've traveled a lot of the world, and of course, so many places have their own unique gift.
Yes.
What place comes to mind as a place that really touched your heart, and when and where? What was it? What place in the world really touched your heart?
Oh my goodness. There are many.
Yeah.
But I will mention two.
Yes.
The first two that came to my mind when I heard that question.
Yeah.
I remember going to Bolivia and to Lake Titicaca, which is the highest, the highest altitude lake in the world.
Yes.
I just sensed a level of peace when I was there that I have not felt anywhere else
Yes.
that I have visited.
Wonderful.
Yes. Then I also have to say, I only once I have been able to go to Africa. That was to South Africa
Yes.
in 2001, because there was a United Nations conference, the second World Conference against racism and racial discrimination and intolerance back in 2001. And the conference, as many others, was complex and had many debates at the last minute, and so it had to be extended. And so because it had to be extended, we were not able to do something that my delegation was planning to do, that after we finished the conference, we planned to take like a trip,
Yeah.
maybe a small safari experience, not as a full, but something modest, but just to be able to experience nature there. So because we were not able to do that per se, what we did was to travel by land from Durban to Johannesburg.
Yes.
And I have to say that has been one of the best experiences of my life, because we actually felt, we were in touch with the people. We went through so many towns and cities, and I was able to look at the sunset, which is something that I have not seen anywhere else in the world. It's huge. The image in my memory of seeing this huge ball of fire.
Yes.
Sun becomes in the sunset in
Yes.
that part of the world, facing us or waiting for us as we drive through the road. It really is a magnificent experience.
Yeah. Yeah. You take me back. It's and the third question, what do you think your father would be most proud of today in terms of what you've done in your life and how you've accomplished such great things? What would stand out for him as the thing he'd be most proud of?
I would say two things.
Yeah.
First one, when I was appointed as Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, that was the time in which Costa Rica and other countries of the world were preparing for this World Conference against racism and racial discrimination.
Yeah.
So it was the time, because I was the first person of African descent to be appointed in the high rankings in diplomacy, and I had, the possibility to influence the policymaking process. I opened up the doors of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for a wide open consultation process with people of African descent, indigenous peoples, and people of Chinese descent in Costa Rica to talk about racism and racial discrimination in our land, in our own society.
Yeah.
I think that he would have been very proud of that.
Yes.
And when I went to the first meeting I attended, there was a preparatory meeting in Chile. I addressed the audience, requesting, to make an extra effort, and I talked to them as a representative of Costa Rica, a country that has been historically committed to respecting human rights, but also as a representative of the people of African descent that also had, have suffered so many violations of human rights throughout the world. I think he would have been very, very proud of that. And needless to say, he would have been absolutely proud of my leading the negotiations at the United Nations to have a legal prohibition of nuclear weapons.
Yes.
And to actually allow many survivors of the atomic bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki and survivors of nuclear testing around the world, in many areas of the world, who have suffered, them in their families, the consequences of nuclear testing, to see, to be part of the process, of the negotiation process at the UN headquarters, but also to see this voting screen at the UN, in which 122 nations of the world voted for a categorical rejection of nuclear weapons and a categorical rejection of nuclear security as a paradigm for security in today's world. An aspect in which actually South Africa has a lot to share with the world, as being one of the few nations that, having been nuclear, decided to dismantle its nuclear weapons program. And
Yes.
it's also, there's another example that South Africa, then contemporary South Africa, can share with the world. I think my dad would have been really very proud, but also because just days before the treaty was adopted, I was able to meet with my siblings, my father's first children, and we were together and they, gave me strength and comforted me and gave me aspiration. I think he would have been very happy to see his children supporting me in this very important endeavor of this trying to build a world without nuclear weapons.
Yeah, it's a remarkable achievement, Elayne. It truly is. And, just some other thoughts around, do you think Mandela's leadership is relevant in the world today? And if so, why? Or if not, why not?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. Oh my goodness, I need to emphasize that. Why? Because today's leadership cannot be divisive. In a world that is completely interdependent and interconnected,
Yes.
that is when we need to engage, that is when we need the most to engage with people who think differently, who act differently. And it seems to me that we are seeing perhaps a cohort of leadership in the world that has lost some of that ability to talk to those who are different from you. We see now a tendency of leaders seeking to speak only with those who think alike.
Yeah.
And that is very good to make friends, but that is not what we need to solve the problems of the world.
Yeah.
At the end, if we go to the International Station and we see the Earth from the space, we are going to realize that we're all together in this reality that is planet Earth. And we need to talk to each other. It doesn't make sense if we go to the balcony or go to space and look at the Earth and at humanity. It really doesn't make sense that we don't cherish that ability, which actually is exactly what Mandela stood for. The ability to talk and to negotiate with those that are completely different, that represent something different, and even to those that have taken actions that have harmed you. You have to find ways of just communicating to find solutions.
Yes.
That is his most important contribution, that leading by making us explore the highest version of ourselves.
Yeah.
That is what he did.
Yeah. If Mandela were standing up at the UN today, in a nutshell, what do you think he'd be saying to world leaders?
If he were to be talking to the
General Assembly.
To the General Assembly today, I think he would exactly emphasize what brings us together as human species.
Yes.
He would try to bring to build these commonalities and to request from us to rise up to the level of where we all, underneath our skin, are exactly the same. Our blood is always the same color, although different tones, but always the same color. DNA is exactly the same, which is different from other species. Just I think he would be a force to remind us of who we really are and how you can either walk out of hell or you can sleepwalk into hell. And he would tell us to intentionally walk away of hell.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to try to build a better version of us.
Any final thoughts, Elayne, around the future of leadership and bold leadership?
Yes, again, I think self-exploration of the leaders. We really need leaders who are very centered on who they are, not because they are going to be superior human beings. They are going to be human beings still, but very centered in the acknowledgement of their strengths and weaknesses, and of the capacity that leaders have to drive us to hell.
Yeah.
Or to take us to a beautiful mountain in which we can just share a better future and or be closer together in facing the difficult times.
Yes, yes. And boldness? What are your thoughts around boldness and bold leadership?
I think it also goes back to this this challenge that I think is that I find as a very pervasive trait in today's world, that we are still, so humanity has changed over millennia.
Yeah.
You and I are very different from the human beings of 500 years ago, needless to say, millennia ago. And I think that current leadership has to be more attuned with whom we are today in the world. We are going to be 9 billion people.
Yes.
In just a few years.
Yes.
And we are going to be sharing one home.
Yes.
This is the most important thought that people need to have, and bold leaders need to have. Either we make that experience a destructive experience,
yeah,
or we embrace ourselves to confront the challenges together and to face the challenges together and try to build a better way of dealing with those challenges that are going to come as we grow to be 9 billion people in this beautiful planet Earth. So boldness, I think about just the lone view, the lone range view.
And taking those courageous decisions.
Taking the courageous decisions.
Yeah, yeah.
That's very difficult. That's very difficult.
Yeah.
But I think the vision,
yeah,
I think what defines a leader,
yeah,
and what separates them is the vision that they have. And this is where Mandela's vision is such a contribution to the world today.
Yes.
Because he was coming from a moment not of happiness. He came as a leader. He came out of difficulty, suffering, transforming himself.
Yes.
And deciding not to reproduce the same problems, but to depart from the problem, reframe the problem, give the problem a different meaning, and create a different path.
Absolutely. And Elayne, you're a woman who has given not only your country a different path, but you've charted a whole new path at the United Nations and a whole new path for the world. And it's such a great joy. I'm so happy to be sharing this time and this moment with you. And I know we're going to do so much more together, my friend. And thank you so much for your bold leadership, for your vision, and for your passion in the world.
Thank you so much, and I have truly enjoyed this conversation. I have opened up my heart and my mind to you, and I hope to continue doing the same in the future.
Yes, we will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Talking to my inspiring friend, Elayne Whyte Gómez, the former Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs and UN Ambassador from Costa Rica, helps us rethink how we approach and deal with globalization, our international interconnectedness and interdependence, and complex adaptive systems. As president of the UN conference, Elayne led the global negotiations for the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, signed by over 100 states and adopted in 2021. We live in a world that has traditionally focused our thinking on linear, binary thinking with a silo mentality. A world that thinks more in terms of black and white, cause and effect, and making binary choices between this or that. And yet we live in a world that is much more complex and complicated. We don't live in silos. We live in a world of interconnectedness and interdependence. A world that is surrounded by complex adaptive systems, systems that are constantly changing, and a world that is pivoting at a rapid rate. Systems are everywhere. They're in our bodies. Our vascular, our cardio, our lymphatic systems, they're in the world, our world of governments, our government systems, our favorite football teams, in our communities, and in the organizations we work in. It begs three questions. The first, what is a system? A system is a group of interactive elements working towards a common goal. The second question, what is systems thinking? Systems thinking is a holistic approach to problem solving and decision making. It is a process of understanding of how these interactive elements influence each other, the common goal, and the system as a whole. The third important question, what is a complex adaptive system? But critically, how do we identify them? Tim Sullivan, the former editorial director of Harvard Business Review Press, helps us with three defining features. We borrow an example from nature, from ants and ant colonies, to help us explain this concept. The first feature is that complex adaptive systems have heterogeneous agents, individual ants, if you like, that decide how to behave, their conduct. Some ants may choose to be foragers and collect edible food. Others do midden work to analyze the trash to seek out edible food. The second feature is that these individual agents or ants interact a lot locally. And it's this very interaction that leads to the third feature, which scientists call emergence. When a lot of ants interact locally and communicate, an ant colony emerges. In real terms, it is the colony, the system as a whole, that is greater than the performance of all these individual ants. And when that happens, that is when we have emergence, and that is when we have a complex adaptive system. What does this mean in our challenging world today? Well, firstly, we need to understand complex adaptive systems. Secondly, we cannot understand the system by simply understanding its individual parts. But perhaps most importantly, it is the system, the ant colony as a whole, more than the individual ants, that takes on a whole new life form. It is the system, the colony, that becomes robust, resilient, adaptive, and has a development life cycle to ensure that the ant colony achieves a higher level of performance, of competence, and success. So until next time, remember that leading boldly is about making thoughtful, clear choices, and bold leadership is about taking bold action, just one small step at a time, one step for you, but together within complex adaptive systems, a giant step for humanity. Take care and take thoughtful, bold action.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leading Boldly into the Future. Please find links and connections mentioned in this show in our blog, and never miss an episode by subscribing at anne-pratt.com. That's ANNE-PRATT.com. May these insights from inspiring industry leaders, remarkable disruptors, and courageous champions of change bring forth a brand new you, emboldened, empowered, and ready to inspire hope. Come back soon, share with your friends, sign up on ann-pratt.com and join our movement for change. Why? Because the world needs you to lead boldly too.